In my last video, I described why, because of how people misread John 3:18, they claim this proves that if you had believed, you're still saved, because you couldn't say they never had believed, which is insane and ridiculous and not true. Uh, and so they that somehow means that you can be an unbeliever, even though this says the unbelieving, actively unbelieving ones will be thrown into the lake of fire, which is hell. If any verse is hell, this one is hell. And so this unbelieving somehow doesn't mean someone who used to believe. Can't mean someone who used to believe even though they stopped believing. I'll just let me just remind you of if that sort of thing makes any sense, you know what else makes sense? Did you know that every fetus when it's first developing is basically female? And there's actually a triggering of certain what do you call it? Certain proteins or certain chemicals or whatever in the production process. If the genetics tell it to do a certain thing because it's male, uh, certain things trigger the male. It's an added thing that a female wouldn't have that's added in a male. Okay, that makes it develop into a male. But so technically, in that sense, all fetuses when they first start developing are identical in that same way. That's non-sex determinate in the developmental process. There's a thing that makes the male parts develop, and so like instead of having a clitoris, there's a penis develops, things like that, right? If that process doesn't kick in, it develops female parts. And by the way, it's actually true that there, among a myriad of other processes that develop a person to be male or female, it's actually true that those things can be distorted, and there's a range of development or underdevelopment or problems where multiple things develop at the same time. So it's actually true that people are born in a sort of mixed gender sort of characteristics. It's complicated. But the people who would almost every single person I've ever met that argues free grace, they don't like gay people very much. They don't think transgenderism is a thing. But if it is a thing and you can be a believer even though you're actively not believing, I think anyone that qualifies for sex too. Then I think that's an argument for transgenderism. In other words, if an unbeliever is really not an unbeliever because they used to believe, well, then anybody and everybody can be a female because at one point in their development, they were a female. And so it doesn't really matter, does it, that some process kicked in later that changed that? So if free grace is true by those same kind of principles of being dishonest, they should be advocating in every case. Anybody who wants to say they're a female, that's a male, that's legitimate. Just like if you can say unbelieving people or that aren't saved doesn't include people that used to be believers, well, everybody used to be a female. So I guess that's totally legit, right? Well, you decide. I can tell you they won't believe that. They won't agree with that because they're hypocrites.